All right, we're at the top of the hour, so we better get started. I see a couple of people still trickling in. Thanks everybody for joining today. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're at in the world. Thanks for joining us today for the OCAP and PBSRP webinar focused on outlining the changes in AS9104-1 2022. I'll say it once so nobody else has to say it of our panelists, the full title, but appreciate everybody joining. Just a few quick housekeeping items before we jump in. We're scheduled for 1 hour today. We may run a little bit over that depending on how many questions we have at the end of the event. We will cover the Q&A portion at the very end. This will be recorded. This is an on-demand webinar, so anybody who's here, you'll get a link afterwards. Be able to watch this for free, share it with your colleagues. So watch for that after the event. Just a note, we will have a series of polls that we will deploy and you'll be asked to respond to throughout the event. So really that just gives us a sense of who we have in the audience, really to tailor the messaging and the discussion points. So please respond. Your participation is very much appreciated there. We do encourage you again to submit your questions. You'll see a little button, a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Submit those at any time. We will try to get to as many as we can at the end of the event. If we can't, we will take that offline and make sure some follow-up is provided back to you. With that said, I'm going to try to stay out of the way. You didn't come to see me. Again, my name is John Bors, president of Plexus International. We got a great tag team of presenters here today. Tim Lee and Darrell Taylor, I'll let them introduce themselves. I've been asked by Darrell to emphasize the retired portion of his job title. But without further ado, Tim, we'll start with you, then go to Darrell, but just introduce yourself, brief background, and then what's one key takeaway or a couple of key takeaways you hope attendees have attending today's event.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Tim Lee from the Boeing Company. As the slide indicates, I'm one of the voting members of the International Aerospace Quality Group Other Party Management Team, and I'm currently the chair of the Americas Sector Registration Management Committee. Been around the business for a number of years and actually started working with Plexus and working with the IQG at the very onset of development of this scheme. So I'm really looking forward to the opportunity today to speak to everyone on the call. I use the term game changer, and I hope today you'll take away with the understanding of the Organization Certification Analysis Process, or OCAP as referred to, and how it will not only provide a good input into the audit planning process, but also give you stakeholders and the suppliers out there an opportunity to be able to publish your current health of your QMS using that process. So that's my key takeaway. Hopefully you'll understand the significance and the change that OCAP's going to bring to our industry. So thank you, John.
Darrell?
All right. My name is Darrell Taylor. I am retired from Raytheon Technologies. I can't seem to get away, but that's okay. I'm still enjoying what I'm doing and doing some teaching. So the one takeaway would, just so you know, my background here is I assisted on the writing committee for this AS9104. I put together the OCAP tool with a lot of input to what that tool looks like. I do recognize that will transition to a bigger platform at some point, but we have it up and running so people can start looking at it and playing with it, and I'll run you through that a little bit later. The takeaway I would say is I would hope you see the fact that what we're doing is really two things. We are leveraging what you're already supposed to be doing. When we look at what's in there, these are things that are coming out of the ISO standards and even the requirements around doing the OCAP and doing the risk analysis. These are elements of the AS9100 series documentation. So it's really leveraging and actually putting some weight to what we've intended with that standard all along. So sit back and listen. So.
Great. Thanks, Darrell. Thanks, Tim. Again, John Bors, Plexus International, and just appreciate the opportunity to be with Tim and Darrell and join you all and just facilitate and host this event. So with that, we will get to our first poll. We try to get as much participation as possible. So I will go ahead and launch our first poll. You see that show up directly on the screen in front of you. Question is, what is your current site structure? Oh man, people are flying in. Everyone's engaged. That's good to see. We'll try to get to about 70% as a minimum, about 50% now. So thank you, everybody. Looks like we have a good portion of industry certified organizations, but also certification bodies. So give it another few seconds here. And usually it balances out on the distribution. It looks like we're about at 80%. We'll go ahead and end that and just share the results so everyone can see. Looks like about 34% single site, 24 multi-site, 11 campus, 5 several, 2 complex, and about 23% from certification bodies. So great. Thanks for everybody for responding there. And with that, Tim, I'm gonna hand it back over to you. Take us through what we'll be covering today, and I'll just back out here.
Okay. Well, just to begin with, that the IQG has incorporated significant changes in our recently published -1 standard. And those that are on the line may not be familiar with this standard. It is the requirements for certification of aviation, space, and defense quality management systems. This standard and this publication includes 2 new processes, one being the organization certification analysis process, as well as we're introducing a performance-based surveillance recertification process that I think will offer up opportunities not only to basically reward high-performing suppliers, but also give you the ability to focus on those areas where your company may not be performing that well. We're going to provide during this webinar an opportunity to learn more about the OCAP process and PBSRP, what they could mean for your organization, and how, when effectively implemented and maintained, they could potentially adjust audit duration and audit planning. And it's all about maintaining a high-performing quality management system. And with that will come benefits and reward if you do so. Organizations' performance will be used to drive audit planning decisions, thereby increasing the effectiveness and the value of the audits. Our motto has always been to have the right auditor at the right location with sufficient time to do an effective audit, thereby increasing the confidence in our certification scheme. Next slide. The rationale for change, because this does represent about 5 years of hard work. We started a few years back with a design specification, gathering information from our stakeholders, understanding lessons learned of the past 10 years, and basically driving a change that would add value. Some significant activity had occurred since the last publication of our 9104-1 as it relates to our baseline. And by the way, our baseline is ISO, and we're linked to the International Accreditation Forum. So just like in the 9100 Quality Management System standard, we use the term ISO 9001 as supplemented by aerospace unique requirements. Well, our certification scheme is ISO International Accreditation Forum based, as supplemented by the aerospace unique requirements. And in our scheme, we use the term industry controlled other party, or ICOP. And the significance of that is that we hold all of our stakeholders accountable for conformance and ensure that we have a robust and conformed and valued certification process. So with ISO, the IAF mandatory documents, along with the 9104 series, we manage this certification process and have value in the certification. Next. It's important that you understand what these processes are and the definitions. When we think about the OCAP, it's really an interactive process between the organization and CB. And I can't emphasize enough, as as Darrell mentioned, these are requirements that already exist as it relates to the gathering of organizational performance data, understanding how well the organization performs, whether or not you have any customer issues, customers' feedback. Ultimately, that data needs to be used to determine the appropriate audit and certification audit program. So that's pretty much the definition of the OCAP as being an interactive process between the CB to determine the organization's scope and the certification audit program, which includes, and here's walk the talk, an element of risk assessment to ensure that we understand the risk and we identify that. The performance-based surveillance recertification program, it's an optional process. Not every certified organization will utilize this program. It has very high hurdles, and we'll talk about later in this presentation, but recognize it is an option that those high-performing certified organizations may choose to use this program in the future. So it's all about having a surveillance and recertification optional process based on objective evidence that demonstrates your organization continually maintains a conforming, effective, and high-performing aerospace quality management system. Next slide. Site structures, as I saw that survey recently, you can tell the complexity when you have a scheme that has basically 5 different search structures in the current 9104-1, starting with the very simplistic single geographical location or a single site, having an interrelationship of sites or a campus structure, multi-site, meaning multiple locations, and even a several site, all the way up to complex. We had to take a step back and say, were we really adding value to the certification scheme, or were we just creating complexity, right? We don't want a complex system. In addition, we've had these different structures in place for a number of years, and the experts across the ISO community, although they took lessons learned from our restructuring and added it to some of their criteria, they're still down the path, the International Accreditation Forum, of just 2 simple structures. And at the end of the day, an organization is either a single site or they're a multi-site. So we wanted to move back to those 2 options to align with the International Accreditation Forum documents. Also note that we didn't bring forth campus because it's not allowed in the ISO, and in our industry, we need to raise the bar. So why would we want to do less than ISO? And it's all about eliminating the need for complex structure oversight committee activity as well. So a simplified approach to certification structure. Next slide. A lot of questions came up during the balloting process and why we moved away from campus and why we didn't retain it, okay? Please recognize that in the version of 9104-1 that's out there, the concept was introduced and it was permitted at the time by the IAF mandatory document. However, since the publication, IAF changed the requirements of MD1 and the calculation of audit duration, thereby bringing our scheme out of compliance with the baseline of IAF ISO 17021 and the associated mandatory documents. So there is no allowance for that campus structure any longer and be compliant. Campus is also not permitted in the calculation of audit duration for ISO 9001 certification or any other accredited management system. One of the things that we offer is call it a combined certification process where you as an organization may have a need to demonstrate to your customers that you have ISO 9001 certification in addition to 9100. So on the certificate, many of our stakeholders have both standards listed. If we were to continue with campus, we would not be allowed to continue the reference to 9001 because IF mandatory document requires the calculation of audit duration separately for each site, and our current requirements didn't allow for that. The audit duration was calculated across all sites. And again, ICOP scheme is based on the requirements for third-party certification. It was not possible to maintain. And then we also looked at introducing of the PBSRP as an alternative. So if you have that multi-site organization that is high performer, compliant to the requirements, meeting expectation, we've added PBSRP to provide that as an alternative. Next slide. A little bit more about the OCAP, the organization context, certification, and audit time calculation has been revised. So when you think about OCAP, think of it more than just calculating how long my audit is going to be. It also includes understanding the organization, the number of sites, the scope of certification. It's also understanding where these sites are located, where is the central function in the structure portion. And then Darrell's going to step you through very detailed analysis of organizational performance and how that's going to feed into calculation of audit duration. It's also aligned with ISO and IAF, ensuring that there is audit duration reductions for those non-applicable processes. And it helps ensure that we establish a minimum baseline of audit duration. And the OCAP results will be used to drive the baseline and increase, and as well as decrease if the organization performs. And then there's also additional graphics and things in the standard that further explain the process and the calculation of audit duration. So we really tried to ensure that this OCAP process would get rolled out with sufficient clarification on how to calculate audit duration. Okay, next slide, please.
Great, and that's going to bring us to our next poll here, Tim. Thanks for kicking us off there.
You bet, John. Thank you.
And I'll go ahead and deploy the second poll. You're going to have 3 questions on this one. Let's try to beat the 80% that we hit last time. Do you have internal auditors that are authenticated or equivalent to an aerospace experienced auditor? What's your overall level of comfort with 9104-1? And then do you plan to utilize PBSRP part of the new requirements? Flying in, good. We're about almost at 40% here. And Tim, getting a little bit of background noise on your mic. If you're able to just mute until come back online. Perfect, thank you. Good, we're about 72%. Looks like it went slowing down. So I'll go ahead and stop us and keep us moving here. Go ahead and share the poll results. So it looks like about 47% have AEA authenticated auditors or equivalent to the training requirements. So we have some certification body personnel obviously as well. Overall level of comfortability, most people in the somewhat comfortable, 52% there. And do you plan to continue to improve your QMS in order to utilize PBSRP? So we about 41% say yes, only 3% no, and 33% unsure. Good. Hey, thanks everybody for participating. I keep seeing a couple of common questions come in. Just as a note, everyone will get a link to the on-demand recording of this exact webinar that will be free to share with any of your colleagues. So that will come to you directly after this event. So stay tuned for that. And Darrell, I'll hand it over to you and back out of here.
Okay, one thing Tim alluded to, and let me just reinforce, we spent, before that 5-year kickoff for that design specification for 9104-1, we spent a year collecting information from all kinds of stakeholders. We were doing SWOT exercises at RMC meetings, at wherever we possibly could. And this is probably one example of the output that we got, especially from the auditors. What we were hearing from the auditors, especially the certification body auditors, is about the timing and how do we treat report writing and things like that. So we adopted what 17021 did, and we got a very clear definition of the difference between audit duration and audit time. Our tables are built around audit duration. They've always been built around audit duration. But what we've done here is we've added in a requirement. It's a 20% bump to your audit duration calculation to cover things like audit preparation. Doing the OCAP tool is going to take time. OCAP tool is a cooperation. It's a collaboration between the certification body and the site. It takes time to get that together, and that should be done early on so that they can properly assign the audit duration time when they get there. The other thing we were hearing was a lot of confusion around report writing. We tried to clarify that, and it is part of the 20%. So report writing should be added on, and there should be time given to the auditors and at the back end to get that report done. So the difference is audit duration is opening meeting to closing meeting. Audit time includes audit duration, but it also covers everything from audit prep through report writing. And again, this is another example of aligning with the ISO standards and getting more clarification on our side. Next page. So there are a few things in here. Go ahead and open up everything here. I'll just walk them through this. So if you look at the top of the OCAP chart, we put this little diagram together. It all starts with organization context. And then it requires an investigation, the certification audit program. There's a risk analysis and there's a give and take between those two blocks. They kind of go back and forth, and ultimately we calculate the audit time. So let me walk you through this a little. One thing, which is a little bit of a sidelight to this whole thing, it's really not built into the OCAP tool, but there will be a requirement that we capture the AQMS standards that you're using. And there's a table that we're requesting that you fill out that says, okay, these are the AS standards we're using. That is really twofold. One, we want to know if, to be honest, if our writing teams are wasting their time on a document that's not being used, we should know that. A lot of time and effort goes in to keep these standards up to date. We should know that. The other thing is, if you are getting these contractually flowed down, it begins to help prepare the auditor. If they know you have a 9102 FAI system that they're auditing, it's good to know that and know that going in. They don't need to be an expert in the standards, but it gives them some information that will help support them when they do their audits. The other thing, this whole front end, is making sure we get the right standard in place. So and one of the things we looked at, a lot of AS 9100s probably should have been 9110s. It's some of the data we looked at just showed that they were a little out of whack, and then some of them should have been 9120s. So we want to make sure we get a good definition of the AQMS standard and get the right standard for each one of our sites. We want to be very clear in the core processes. What does that look like? And we're really sticking with the fundamentals here. This is really all about, do you have design? Do you have manufacturing? Do you do service? I mean, be very, very clear about that. We read through a number of our certificates that are out there, and a lot of it's fluff. And you sit there and go, "Well, I really don't know what they do. I'm really confused." And we're really pushing for a very clear definition of the core processes in this process. In here, and you'll notice in 9104-1, we've opened up a little, and we're again aligning with the ISO standards. We talk about physical sites and we talk about virtual sites. That is allowed. You need to have a methodology to deal with that, but the standards are clear on that. So that all becomes part of the certification audit program. What am I looking at? I will say this: if you're dealing with a multi-site, I'll give you a heads up. Some of the training that I think will come out, you should declare a central function. Now, I said central function, not central site. The central function may be virtual. And it may not be, you might have a site with 5,000 people in it and a couple, 5 other satellites with 1,000 each. It doesn't mean that that 5,000 person site is the central function. There may be an element of that which is the central function, not the entire site. So something we'll need to keep in mind when we do our calculation. The risk analysis, and I'm going to show you a little bit more information on this in a minute, but what we're looking at is how is the organization performing? How is complexity? Complexity, just so you know, that actually came right out of an ISO document. If you look at MD5 and MD1, we've modified that for the aerospace world, but we have a complexity chart that is included in the OCAP tool. What's your internal audit maturity? The more mature your audit program, that's a good indication to the certification body in the industry that there's good oversight, there's checks and balances in place, and we want to capture that. What is your customer thinking? What in my next chart, you're going to see we already put these are AS requirements, whether we're talking 9100, 9110, 9120, these are requirements that you need to address anyway. In the end, you're going to calculate a risk. They're going to be high, medium, or low. If you are high, we are looking to bump your audit time by 10%, if at least the minimum. If you are low, you could get a reduction of up to 10%. So there's some benefit to understanding what your risk is. The audit time, as we mentioned before, that includes on-site, that includes off-site. Audit duration is how we calculate it. You'll notice in the tables, we've done what I think is a good job. If you recall the old table, the only reductions you got if you were less design. Well, that's not how it works anymore. So we actually were able to take the 9110 table and combine it with, and we have one table today. Everybody, whether you're 9100, 9110, 9120, you work from one table, and you'll take the appropriate reductions based on how you're structured. So MD5 was the base of this. We're talking, it was the basis for the planning and for the auditing and the report writing. So go ahead and go to the next page. So let's talk a little bit about the risk analysis. In here, there are 4 categories that we're looking at, and one is on-time delivery, and that should be no surprise to you. If you look at, one of the AS standards, 5.1.2, we are required to be, product and service conformity and on-time delivery performance are measured. So it should be something that we can get to. And if you notice in the data source, the organization controls this. So it's up to the organization in partnership with the certification body to define what that on-time delivery number is going to be. From an auditor perspective, that's the type of thing if they go in and say, well, I got my on-time delivery is 80%. Well, if you go pull that thread a little and you find your OEMs are requiring 90% or better or 95% or better, then the certification body should be pushing back and saying that's not realistic. It doesn't fit with what the customer is asking for. So we're also looking at conformity, and one of the things we're looking at, and it's really up to the organization to define this as well. But one of the items that could be in this calculation is item escape rate. But any number of quality characteristics, key characteristics can make this up. And again, it's up to the organization to help define what that's going to look like. And again, 9.1.2, customer satisfaction. Information to be monitored and used for the evaluation of customer satisfaction shall be included, but is not limited to product and service conformity, on-time delivery performance, customer complaints, and corrective action requests. These all make up those next 2 categories. And what are the customer metrics? How are they measuring the site? Each one of these, and actually the last one, let me talk about that one real quick. This is really taken from the previous pair. And the quick answer is if you, this is your first audit, you have no history, so you're probably gonna be in the middle, or you can do not applicable for the moment. But the first go around, it's really what we're looking at is the lowest scoring pair. So if you had you did a design, manufacturing, and you had 4 or 5 pairs, really the lowest one is your weakest link. And if you did end up with a major in one of your areas, the concern is overall, you would end up recording this as probably a 1, possibly a 2 in your pair, and you'd be over on the right-hand side in the high column. So once this is all done, you calculate out a number, and it's going to give you a high, low, or medium calculation. And the result is, if you're in the middle, there's no change. The audit duration is what it's calculated out to be. If you find that you are you're actually low risk, you're going to be able to take a 10% reduction. If you're high risk, we're looking for the certification body to add 10%, really in part to deal with those high risk areas. And that's really the intent. Next page. Another change that took place in the standard, as I mentioned earlier, the only reduction you were allowed to take was for design and in general. So we've actually opened that up a little. There's no longer a requirement to do purchasing in every single audit. That's no longer required. And because we recognize there are multi-sites that have centralized purchasing areas. So then you need to be able to take a reduction for purchasing if they're not there. We actually are allowing you to flex, do some flexing for a number of things. So if you don't have design, you get a 20% reduction. And by the way, that is no different than it was before, where that was built off the existing tables. If you have a design facility, 15% only, well, 15% can be taken off because you don't have, or I'm sorry, 20%, the bottom one, you don't have manufacturing going on there. If you don't have supply chain, you're going to take a 15% reduction. Some of the multi-sites will probably end up with a 10% reduction in most of their sites, because it's possible, hypothetically, that the central function may be the management of your quality management system. So you need to work with the certification body and come up with the right reductions, but just recognize it's much greater flexibility than we've ever had in the scheme. And it's really allowing you to flex the right amount of time for the right locations. So the auditor is not, in part, wasting their time in areas that, just are add on just to meet the audit duration. So if you look at the equation at the bottom, you take the risk analysis, you do the audit duration calculation, that's table 4 and table 6, and you will come up with your total audit duration time adjustment. Next page. Let me talk briefly about PBSRP. So PBSRP is kind of a reward for high performing organizations. I would argue it is a high hurdle to get over. It is built on, just give you a real quick history, the Advanced Surveillance Recertification Program, ASRP, used to be MD, I believe it was MD document number 3, did get rescinded. The aerospace community, this writing team reached out to the IAF and said, we really like that. It really never got any traction, I would argue, in part because it was little known. And really, is seen at this huge monster to get over. And unfortunately, there were only a handful of companies that actually went off and took advantage of ASRP. And we wanted to reintroduce it as really a methodology to address high performing organizations. So as you can see in here, there are a number of things that come into play. So and I should have looked at the screen there, but it does replace IAF MD3. It's now been incorporated into 9104. You're not going to find this in the ISO world. It is optional. And let me emphasize this. This is purely optional. It is not a requirement. Unlike OCAP, OCAP is not an option. You have to do OCAP regardless of the type of site you're with. I would argue if you're doing OCAP and you end up being low risk and you meet this criteria, you are a real good candidate of looking at PBSRP and taking advantage of this. It is also applicable to both single and multi-site. I'm going to show you a chart of how that works in a minute. But there are things that have to happen. As I mentioned, it's high hurdle. You really have to have great control over your customer complaints. You have to have a robust internal audit program with a aerospace lead auditor. These auditors have to have taken and passed like the AATT training. These are all requirements to play in this arena. You have to have good results from really no majors from NCRs for your CB audits, and you have to be maintaining it. So if you look over to the left, this is the table that shows up in the standard. There are things, if you're a brand new company, you can't take advantage of this. You need to give yourself a full completion of the AQMS certification cycle before you can even get involved with this. Your OCAP risk analysis has to be either low or medium, and including the central function. Central function plays a key part in this whole calculation. You have to have an internal audit program that really represents that they're independent and they are almost like a certification body that's internalized in the company. And that's really what this is all about. And they need to be looking at things like performance, customer complaints, doing risks, understanding change management as part of their process. It can't be a situation where, oh, this year we're going to do purchasing, next year you've got to do a full quality management system every year at every site. So the program has to be defined, it needs to be structured. It is a multi-event program. It's not these programs where I'll do 50% of my QMS this year and 50% next year. That's not what we're looking for here. You think about to get to a robust system, we need this full QMS every year. And I'm going to show you why in a minute. It'll explain why we need that level of auditing. Your internal auditors need to have passed the Aviation, Space, and Defense lead auditor course. You have to have an ethics policy. That was a change to the standard and definitely an add in to the PBSRP. We want to make sure the companies have an ethics policy. They need, and really the reason behind that is this team needs to be independent. This audit team needs to be independent and have the power to call it like they see it. And really, if there are issues, they need to be putting that on the table so you can deal with it. You look at here, no externally identified major nonconformities, and there are some areas that we're looking for. So either from a CB, a customer, or regulatory as defined in 9101 in the past 12 months related to internal audit, management review, or corrective action processes, either to the central function or a single site within the organization. Now, the reason for this is when you think about those three categories, internal audit, management review, and corrective action, these are control points. And if you're doing all this activity, these are the areas that you should be picking up on majors and things that are impacting your quality management system. That's why we focused on these three, because they are critical control points within a quality management system. G is almost a given. If you've been suspended, if you're a certified organization, you've been suspended, you're out. You're out for like 6 years. To get to a suspension, that is significant. And you're just not going to be qualified for 6 years before you can come back into this program. And you have to be meeting your customer satisfaction metrics. It doesn't make any sense here if we do all this activity, but in the end, we're not meeting their requirements. And it has to be based on customer provided data. So that's what makes up the program. That is really why we say it is a high hurdle. There's a lot of work to get there, but there are rewards to it. And if you go to the next page, this is just an example. We threw together an example. So you got 9 facilities. You're a multi-site. Without PBSRP, which is that top line. Every year, 1 year you do every site. It'd be a recertification year, and every single site would get a full quality management system audit and the central function. Year 2, you get 50% or 5, and then the following year, 4 of the sites would be audited. And again, every year you'd have the central function. With PBSRP, the way it works is you split it into a third. So 3 sites would get done in year 1, 3 in year 2, and 3 in year 3. making up that, and it's all done within the certification cycle. Each one of those years, a central function gets done, but you think about the math here, and on top of that, you could get up to a 33% reduction in audit time just because you're in the PBSR program. Essentially, what PBSRP does is eliminate this. If you look at the first line, the partial QMS audit of all 5 sites, and in both those off years or those surveillance years. So that's essentially what it does. And there's a benefit to that. I mean, you just think about it. CB is going to come in and spend, except for the central function, will be at every one of your sites every 3rd year to meet this requirement. Almost cuts your audit time in half overall. So, and just so you know, we did the math. You can go. Next page is fine. Just so you know, this is a graphic of what we just described, but it meets the requirement of MD5. When we did the math and sorted this all out, we did meet the requirement of MD5. I will tell you, there was a group that went off to the technical committee to get them to look at this process, leveraging ASRP, and they agreed that we could continue putting ISO on our certificates as we have in the past. There's a real quick look at it, and I won't go through the whole thing, but just top left-hand corner, you can see it applies to a multi-site or a single site. It doesn't matter. There are things in there. The first question is, have you completed a certification cycle? Have you been up and running for 3 years? If the answer is no, you're done. You're out. You don't qualify. If the answer is yes, then you can start digging into this. And again, you need to qualify, and you go back to that table. It'll walk you through the qualifications that I just went through. If you do qualify, then you come into the move over documented support, and it does need to be documented. This is auditable, so the certification body and the organization are subject to an audit and to make sure the system is working and does meet our requirements. So it needs to be documented in a way that we can do this and justify why we're in PBSRP. In the top line, if you follow this through, if I go up the multi-site structure and run that across, it's what I said earlier. They're looking at 33% of your sites every year over the course of 3 years. Each one of those audits, just so you know, are full recertification audits. We don't really, the calculation is not based on surveillance. It's based on a recertification audit. And also, just so you know, in the end, it's a max reduction of up to 50%, given how you're structured and everything else. So, and we clarify that. If you're a single site, you can get a 33%. You go down to the bottom. If you're a single site, you can get a 30%. You meet all that requirement. You're low risk. You got your trained auditors doing their job. You could qualify to be PBSRP as well. You're not because you think about a multi-site, the benefit is still the certification body sees that operation every single year regardless. They're looking at a central function every year. They're looking at a third of every site every year, and they're doing full certification audits. With a single site, you really can't do that. And we can't disappear for 2 years and then come back a 3rd year. So they will be back, but you can take advantage of audit duration reductions. And again, that's in the formula. So it applies to both. It's a multi-site and a single site benefit by trying to achieve this. I think it is a reward system. I do think in the end, you're going to reap some of the rewards if you manage a lot of it internally and can get a low risk or medium to low risk. It's going to benefit you in the long run. So next page. And this kind of summarizes what I just said. So the methodology, all sites are done initial. You have to start there. You have to understand what each site's all about. 1/3 of the sites for each surveillance plus a central function. And 1/3 of the sites for recertification, it doesn't matter. It's kind of what I described earlier. You break it into 3 pieces and you go a third, a third, a third. There are adjustments, program adjustments, when performance criteria is not continually met. So there's language in the standard there's actually a whole table of what happens when we see certain things. So if you do have a major, what does that mean? It may be that we go back and we say, hey, you got to get that under control and bring it back in. If it persists for over 2 years, then we question whether or not you should be in the PBSRP system at all. Though there are some rules in there on how that works and how that is put together. I'll just, because I was actively involved in, if you listen to our previous webinar, we did talk a lot about AIM. I'm not going to tell you that AIM is a method to get you to PBSRP, but it certainly could help. The AIM tool that was introduced, that's the Aerospace Industry Maturity Model, is an excellent way to evaluate the maturity of your organizations. And there is an opportunity to leverage some of this. And I would argue, if you started adopting some of the world-class, benchmarked ideas that come out of that AIM tool, it will help you get to PBSRP. And it's something that dovetails very nicely with what we're trying to do with 9104-1 and gives you a roadmap in a way to becoming a more mature type organization. That's not to say I can't be PBSRP and also leverage AIM. Certainly you can. I don't want to say they're directly correlated, but there is a there is a comparison there that should be made, and an opportunity to leverage it and improve your process. So, and I think I'm all set.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Darrell. Thanks so much. I see a lot of questions here coming in. We are almost to the end of the webinar. We're going to try to get as many as we can answered. I will do one last poll here. So again, appreciate your participation on the last couple. I will quickly launch the last one. Now that Darrell's talked to you a little bit more about PBSRP, would you consider using it, knowing what you know now? And then, are you familiar with AIM, the Aerospace Improvement Maturity Model, that is available at aim.iaqg.org? And we got lightning quick responses again. So give it a few more seconds here. And Tim, we still got you with us as well?
I'm still here. You bet.
Perfect.
Yep.
Perfect. We'll dive into the quick summary and then go into the Q&A here. Okay, it looks like we're losing momentum. So go ahead and end that. Share the results here. So it looks like about 41% yes on consider using PBSRP, 23% still unsure, 7% and no. Looks like we've got pretty low level of usage of AIM so far, at only 8%. A lot of people have heard of it, 41%, but not yet used and not familiar, about half. So we will make sure everyone gets information on the Aerospace Improvement Maturity Model. It's a great tool, a great initiative by the IAQG to really pave the way for ongoing maturing of the AQMS and paying that forward to the industry. So we'll go ahead and stop that. Darrell, you want to wrap us up with the summary here?
Sure. Real quick, I mean, when you think about this, AS9104-1, it does represent significant changes to the standard. Significant changes to our certification process. Though I'll just recognize for 5 years, there was a lot of work that went into looking at what was happening in the ISO world, looking at what you wanted. You know, you're the stakeholders. We spent a year poking at the stakeholders and asking them how to influence this. And a lot of that activity just shows it's in the standard today, and they got rolled up in here. I do think OCAP is for everybody. I think it leverages the standard as we've got it presented, and really helps you as a certification body, if you're in that world, and the organization. How do I address those things, those requirements that are already in the standard? Just so you know, the IAQG OPMD will be managing this industry transition, and maybe I will cut to Tim to talk briefly about supplemental rule, which just got published. So I'll let Tim talk briefly about this.
Yeah, first of all, thanks, Darrell. Excellent presentation, clarifying some of the requirements. And those that provided questions, I know in this little bit of time we have, we're not going to be able to get to most of them. Do appreciate the feedback though. John will capture those and we'll use those as input into some further guidance information. And like we said, try to answer as many as we can. As Darrell mentioned, the other party management team will be managing the transition because the 9104 series has requirements for not only our certified organizations, but the certification bodies, the accreditation bodies, and even the sector management committees. And so it was important that we had a supplemental rule for accreditation to the new standard, that is SR 004. The good news being number 4, that means we've had 3 previous successful transitions. So just to let you be aware that we've done this in the past. There'll be bumps along the road. We know there will be, but we believe we have a comprehensive plan with clear target dates for when the various stakeholders should be completed with transition. That includes elements such as auditor training, training of the accreditation body assessors, training of our other party assessors. It also includes the rollout of our new OASIS V3 system that's coming later this quarter. So that's all part of the transition activity. But ultimately, you can go to the login page of the online aerospace supplier information system, and you will see a new icon there that links to a landing page. And that's where you'll find that we have comprehensive tools there for a top-level overview presentation of the new requirements. Of course, we have the supplemental rule itself. We also have a transition roadmap that further defines and breaks down each of the standards and the plan for transition. And then there's also a copy of an available matrix, an OCAP tool, if you will, that Darrell spent a lot of time developing that can be used as a reference for CBs developing their OCAP processes and beginning to work with clients. And ultimately, I'm very pleased that we have reached agreement and we're ready to roll, as the saying goes. And certainly we need all the stakeholders on this call to help support us with the successful transition.
Great, thanks, Tim. Appreciate that,
Yep.
Darrell. We'll roll into the Q&A here. We did just mention, for those of you that aren't aware of AIM, the Aerospace Improvement Maturity Model, again, this is an IAQG initiative really to help organizations take their QMS beyond compliance and towards maturing over time. This, as Darrell said, is not a requirement for PBSRP or OCAP, but in the context of PBSRP, certainly cannot harm and is a good tool to help provide a roadmap should your organization go down the route of utilizing PBSRP or not, and even in general, just to get a pulse and the health of your QMS as it stands. So we'll make sure to send out information about that afterwards as well. Just make sure everyone has that at their fingertips. And with that, we'll go ahead and roll through some questions. Again, we don't have unlimited time, but we'll try to just bounce through them. Darrell and Tim, I will rely on both of you to answer these so that we get the correct response. So we'll start it off with the first one here. Has site been defined? Can a single site include multiple buildings separated by a single team? Is the building across the street a separate site?
Darrell, you want me to take that one? It's a good one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, first of all, we spent a lot of energy on trying to define a site. I will tell you that a site is a single geographical location that may be a single building, it may be a multiple buildings. If they're right across the street from each other, they could still be considered a single site. What we're relying on is the definition in ISO, IAF mandatory documents as the baseline, and we have not departed from that definition. So again, encourage you to work together with your certification body and justify whether or not your organization's within a single geographical location, or is it a multi-site, whereas you have one location on the north side of town and you have another location on the south side of town. That's not a single site. So, but as always, that is a key issue that continues to come up, and the canned answer is it's in accordance with the ISO criteria.
Thanks, Tim. I got another one here. This standard's new to me. My question is, as an AS9100 certified company, does this new standard require? And 9104. So
It's required for all certification activities. So if you plan to be certified to either 9100, 9110, or 9120, our aerospace quality management system standards, and listed in the online aerospace supplier information system database, 9104-1 will apply to your organization.
Next, so is there any potential reduction in audit days for certified organizations that have very little aerospace business, say 3 to 4% overall sales, specifically with relatively low risk products?
Darrell, that's a good one for you.
First off, I would definitely talk to the certification body about that, and to come to it. But my gut reaction is no. You still have to cover all the elements. And if you have an aerospace, none of the calculations were based on the percentage of business. So my simple answer is no. But I would work with my CB on that to make sure we get the right approach. So
great. Another one here. Audit duration defined as the overall time for surveillance and recertification as defined in IAFMDs. Therefore, audit duration equals audit time plus audit time divided by 100 times 20 as specified in IAFMDs.
My lights just went dim, John. So that was one of the rather complex
Yeah,
questions.
we'll answer that one in
let's,
written form.
Yeah. Well,
I have an answer.
Let's say this.
Okay.
Well, go ahead, Darrell.
It's numbers, I can play that game. Essentially, if you look at the tables in MD5, they were built on duration as well. So there's really no difference. So when you do this calculation, we build everything off of MD5. It is a 20% bump, and that is a duration calculation. So we do the whole thing, and at the end, you bump it by 20%. That gives you audit time. So it's really, that's the math. It's that simple.
Right. And again, for anybody we don't get to, we will take the question and make sure you get a response. We got a lot of them here that have come in. When do you foresee the incorporation of FAR clauses calling out AS9104 as a mandatory requirement in RFPs and IFBs, and at what dollar level?
Unable to answer. Next question.
Yeah. In the case of multi-site certification structure, the audit time for planning and reporting shall be calculated for each individual site or will be calculated at the end.
Can you say that again?
In the case of multi-site certification structure, the audit time for planning and reporting will be calculated for each individual site or will be calculated at the end. And they give an example of site 1, 3 person days, site 2, 2 person days.
So I've seen a couple different things. I would argue you can go 2 different ways on it. There is additional detail in there on how you treat that. I guess my point is, one system that I'm very familiar with, every site gets calculated. You look at every site, you calculate it, and especially in PBSRP, you want to break that out, you want to truly understand it. But I've also seen systems where they do an audit over, and it's really up to the CB. They'll do an audit over the course of, they won't be done until they've done every one of the sites in the multi-site. And really all depends on the CB. The intent was you would do it site by site because you're going to calculate the duration for that site and bump it by 20%. You got to write a report. But they may want to think about that. If they're writing one report at the very end, you have to allow enough time to do that. So it's something to measure, so, or pay attention to. So
great. I know we're running up on an hour, but we'll stay on for a few minutes, try to answer as many as we can. I've seen a couple of times a question about can you clarify the AEA or equivalent training requirements? Is that something Tim or Darrell, either of you want to answer?
Well, I think there's a couple issues there as it relates to the performance-based surveillance recertification process. We do have an expectation that the auditors have an equivalency to an AEA, because let's face it, there's a significant amount of reduction in audit duration. So we want to ensure that the auditors conducting your internal audits have the same credentials, if you will, as an aerospace auditor. So the requirement is that your internal auditors must successfully pass an AS9100 lead auditor course. So that's the requirement. There's no requirement for them to be authenticated, but they must demonstrate that they've successfully passed a course.
I would add to that. I mean, go look at AS9104-3. That's what they have to meet. They have to be equivalent to the requirements in that -3. So we are looking for things like, you know, do they have the right history? You know, you can't jump in and be an AEA if you've got 6 months in the aerospace business. It's just that doesn't fit, doesn't work. So whatever those requirements are, and even moving forward, whatever they 9104-3 continues to as it evolves, and I know it's new, we have to be equivalent to that document.
Okay. So equivalent training, equivalent experiential requirements as an AEA, regardless of authentication is undertook. Good. Will OCAP cover a review of the organization's non-applicable clauses and justification? In particular, there seems to be confusion, especially for clause 8.3, design non-applicability.
I guess I'd have to look at that question. Go ahead, Tim.
Well, I think it's all about scope of certification. What is the core competencies within your organization? And there's allowances within the audit duration calculation for reduction of things such as the no design, right? But that comes with justification, and justification for non-applicable clauses means you can continue to meet your customer requirements and the scope of your certification. That's the key about justification, and that's included in OCAP because that's part of the calculation of audit duration.
Take a few more here. Do the inputs to the AQMS and IQG standards include both certifiable standards, AS9100, and non-certifiable support standards, 9115, 9145?
So I think what that is referring to, that we've created within the organization and the scope of certification an expectation to understand when an organization has chosen to adopt, either by contract because of customer requirement, some of our supporting standards. Easy one is first article inspection, AS9102. We're not asking the CB auditors to audit to that standard, but we really need to, in order to develop and plan for a more effective audit, we need to ensure there's an understanding of which aerospace standards have been adopted. So up front, during the organizational analysis piece of this, you'll be asked to declare which aerospace supporting standards you have implemented within your quality management system for the purposes of better audit planning and understanding of the organization prior to the audit conduct. So that's where we're headed.
Great, thanks, Tim. The work from home personnel count as a virtual site? Maybe a quick one on that, Darrell or Tim.
It depends. And I would argue perhaps you'd have to look at it and justify it. I don't think there's a simple answer to that question. I mean, I would argue a lot of the activity that's going on right now, especially we recognize the fact that, you know, businesses have evolved. You know, we learned over this pandemic in the last 2 years, we have a lot of people sitting at home. But I would argue if I go look at a site, I just happen to have my purchasing group sitting at home because they can work from home, I probably would not call it a virtual site. I would call part that it's probably part of that site and it's part of that head count. And we have to, as an audit, you know, knowing that up front is very helpful. So the auditor, when they do their plan, needs to be able to get to that data and make sure that, you know, and it may be that you're doing an audit and you're doing a virtual audit. I mean, they're calling in, giving you information that happens today. So It's not an easy answer. It really depends. And it's a lot of it can be justified. It really is working with the certification body and the organization and coming up with the right answer for that. So.
Right.
And there's another question that came in about definition of a virtual site. I would remind everyone that the definition for virtual site is contained within the International Accreditation Forum Mandatory Document 5. So you can go there and find the definition for virtual site.
I'll be mindful of Tim's time, Darrell's time, and of course, everybody who's on here. There's a lot of questions that have left unanswered. We're really not trying to ignore them. We'll just pick one last one here, and this is just an order of when they came in. Related to the effective timing of the new requirement and the transition. Darrell and Tim, there's a lot of different elements to this transition and different interested parties. So leave that to you guys to respond.
Yeah, that is definitely a Tim question.
Thank you. Well, and I turned my camera back on just so everybody understood. I'm not retired, but I do belong to Darrell's Gray Beard Club. So, no, but ultimately it's a great question, guys. And we've stepped back as a committee and we brainstormed. Number one, we want to do it right. We're not in a rush, right? So we want to make sure we give all of our stakeholders ample time to understand the requirements, to update their internal processes, to address the requirements, and then deploy. So ultimately, the supplemental rule sets those timelines based on who comes first, if you will. And let's face it, at first, right out of the gate, we need to get the committees, we need to get the accreditation bodies with systems and processes in place. So the first 6 months of transition are focused on those entities, right? So by June, by the summer, we hope to have that in place. Then you begin the process of evaluating the certification body procedures and processes. We told the CBs all along that we would give them time to incorporate and update their systems and begin reaccreditation sometime in September timeframe, with the understanding that we hope to move between September and the 1st of 2023 and complete that process to get all the certification bodies accredited. Then once accredited, that's when it actually cascades down to the actual certified organizations, beginning first with the initial, right? All initial certifications will be to the new standard once the CB is reaccredited. And then the remaining activity will be based on the next surveillance or the next recertification audit and bringing all the stakeholders into the scheme. So it's a very comprehensive plan broken down based on the stakeholder and when the need to support the overall transition plan. So looking forward to it.
Great. Well, first, thanks everyone for joining. You will be getting again an on-demand recording to this event. Any questions that we could not get answered, which I know are quite a few, do apologize. Make sure to close the loop with you after. That's something that will be aligned with the IAQG team. If there's anything, any questions that you have further that you weren't able to submit, you will have a survey as soon as this event closes, be brought to a screen. Just ask you to complete that satisfaction survey. Anything else that you need answered or you'd like answered, we'll do our best there. But a special thanks to Tim, Darrell, appreciate all your contributions to the IAQG for the opportunity to really partner on this webinar and educational engagement. So thanks for everyone for joining. I know we're running over, but Darrell, Tim, I'll leave any last words to the two of you.
I look forward to the challenge. Be safe and stay healthy, everyone.
Thanks, Tim.
My parting shot is I'm retired. But if you need any help, I'm around. So
he said he has a lot of free time, is what I heard. But, hey, thanks everybody. Appreciate it again. We'll do our best to get your response back to your question. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Darrell. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.